Chapter 1. The Divine Child of Alexandria. I was born in the house of kings, with the blood of pharaohs and conquerors mingling in my veins. Alexandria, my birthplace, was a glittering jewel on the Mediterranean, a city of marble palaces and sunlit columns where the Greek world met the Egyptian, its air thick with the scent of spices from the harbor and the tang of the nearby sea. From my earliest memories, I understood that I was not an ordinary child. I was Cleopatra, daughter of King Ptolemy, and in me lived the hopes of Egypt. My name itself, bestowed by my father, meant glory of the Father, and I felt the weight of that meaning even as a little girl playing in the palace halls. As a child, I often wandered through the vast corridors of the royal palace, my sandaled feet padding softly over mosaiced floors, depicting the gods and heroes of our lineage. Outside, the gardens overflowed with jasmine and lotus, their perfume drifting in the warm air. I remember chasing brightly colored butterflies past statues of ancient kings, while my nurse, a kindly Egyptian woman named Neferura, clucked her tongue and kept me in sight. Laughter was easy then. Within the palace walls, I was sheltered by luxury, perfumed baths, golden toys, sweet honey cakes served on silver plates. Yet even in those carefree moments, a flicker of awareness, a sense that my path was different, already stirred within me. My father, Ptolemy Twencharis, was often away attending to affairs of state, but whenever he was present, I basked in his attention. He would scoop me into his arms and call me my little queen. I would giggle and straighten the tiny diadem placed on my braided hair, trying to look as regal as possible. To me, he was the grandest man in the world, tall and proud, with a beaked nose and eyes lined with kohl in the Egyptian style. At banquets, he played the flute with remarkable skill, earning him the nickname Auletes, the flute player. The melodies would fill the banquet hall as courtiers clapped, and I, seated by his side, clapped the loudest of all. In those moments, I believed my father a living god, and perhaps to a child he was. Yet even gods have burdens. My father's laugh, hearty and resonant after wine, would fade when he thought I was not looking. As I grew older, I learned why. The kingdom he ruled, our Egypt, the land of the Nile, was under strain. Rome, the burgeoning republic across the sea, loomed over us, its senate and generals treating kings like my father as mere pieces in their games of power. Pharaoh though he was, my father had to bow to Roman demands, paying heavy tribute in gold to appease them. I was too young to grasp the intricacies, but I caught fragments of tense whispered conversations in the colonnades late at night. Talk of debts owed to Roman lenders, envoys from Rome strutting through our palace with insolent confidence. Even before I could fully understand the words like debt or tribute, I understood the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes whenever messengers arrived bearing Rome's eagle seal. Still, my childhood days were filled more with learning than with worry. From the age of 7, I was entrusted to the care of Philostratus, my tutor, a wise old scholar of the museum, the great library and academy of Alexandria. Each morning, after a light meal of figs, cheese, and barley bread, I hurried to a pillared study chamber overlooking the harbor. There, scrolls and wax tablets cluttered the desks, and the scent of papyrus and ink hung in the air. With patient enthusiasm, Philostratus taught me to speak as the Greeks do, and to reason as their philosophers had. I learned to recite the epic tales of Homer in sing-song Greek verse, to parse the logic of Aristotle, and to appreciate the beauty of geometry and the stars. Philostratus was impressed by my quick mind. "You have the makings of a true philosopher queen, princess," he once told me with a proud smile as I mastered a passage of Plato. His words ignited a spark within me, a hunger not just for knowledge, but for the power that came with understanding the world. Indeed, I delighted in knowledge. I felt a kinship with Alexander the Great, the Macedonian founder of our dynasty, who had built this magnificent city of Alexandria 3 centuries before. In the library's scrolls, I read how Alexander conquered the world with not just his sword, but a vision of blending cultures. I saw him standing where I stood, looking at the harbor. That vision lived on in our family, the Ptolemies, and I felt it stirring me. But I was not only the child of Macedonian Greeks. I was also the daughter of the Nile. My education was not confined to Hellenic arts. Thanks to my nurse Neferura and the priests and priestesses who frequented the palace, I grew up speaking the melodious tongue of the Egyptians alongside Greek. When I first addressed an Egyptian servant in her own language, a soft request for more pomegranate juice, I remember her eyes widening in surprise and then beaming with devotion. "Our princess has the heart of Egypt," she murmured. Her words thrilled me. Other Ptolemaic rulers had not bothered to learn the native speech, but I hungered to know every dialect from the Delta to the Cataracts. Language was a key to people's hearts, Philostratus taught me, and mastering Egypt's own tongue felt like unlocking a deeper chamber within my own soul, connecting me to the very soil of my kingdom. By the time I saw 12 floods of the Nile, I could converse in half a dozen languages, Greek and Egyptian, of course, but also Syrian Aramaic from traders in the markets, a smattering of Hebrew from Jewish scholars who studied in Alexandria's library, and even some Old Persian taught to me by a visiting scholar, intrigued by my zeal. Words and their meanings danced in my mind like music, each language revealing a new world. In the evenings, I'd practice by speaking to anyone who would listen. A stable hand, a merchant's wife, a Roman envoy, switching tongues to suit each, delighting in their astonishment. It was more than mimicry, it was power, the ability to slip between worlds, to understand the currents flowing beneath the surface of courtly Greek or marketplace hustle. It was also in these early years that I first came to see myself as a living embodiment of the divine. My family claimed descent from Dionysus and the immortal Macedonian line, but in Egypt, royalty was more than mortal. One warm afternoon, my father led me by the hand to the temple of Isis in the royal quarter. Incense smoke curled in the air as we approached the towering shrine of the goddess. Priests in linen robes bowed to us, their future queen, as sacred hymns in ancient Egyptian echoed from the stone walls. Inside, golden lamplight flickered over painted reliefs of Isis suckling her infant Horus. The high priest placed his wrinkled hand gently on my head and proclaimed that I was the noble child of Isis, beloved by the goddess. My heart pounded with a mixture of pride and humility. In that moment, under the gaze of statues and sacred symbols older than time, I felt a destiny coil around me. It was less a burden than a fierce electric current, confirming a truth I already sensed. I was marked. Isis was the mother goddess, the protector of the Nile and its people. If I was to be her incarnation on earth, then I must love and protect Egypt just as fiercely, with a mother's unyielding heart and a goddess's unwavering gaze. I carried that revelation with me, out of the temple and back into daily life. Afterward, when I poured water for a libation or touched the cool stone of a shrine, I imagined the goddess's power flowing through my fingertips. I was still a girl, but I strove to act with the grace and dignity of a goddess. My play became practice for rule. In pretend games, I would drape a bedsheet as a makeshift gown and proclaim edicts to my younger siblings in our nursery, making them giggle. My little brother Ptolemy, who would one day be Ptolemy XIII, would babble and clap, not understanding my solemn words, but sensing the authority in my tone. Even Berenice, my elder sister by nearly a decade, would smile indulgently at my antics, though I caught her rolling her eyes when she thought I did not see. Berenice, she was almost a woman grown while I was still chasing dolls, and she sometimes regarded me with a strange intensity. Once, I peered around a column and saw her standing over our father's throne in his absence, a crown tilted on her dark curls, her expression hard as granite. When she noticed me, she laughed and set the crown back in its place, beckoning me over sweetly. Little Cleo, you mustn't spy, she chided, booping my nose. But I did spy, and I remembered. Perhaps it was then I first understood that love and rivalry can live side by side in a royal family. My royal family was indeed complex. The Ptolemies had always married siblings to each other to keep the bloodline pure, a practice both dutiful and dangerous. It fostered unity, they said, yet history whispered tales of betrayal born from shared thrones. My own mother, whom I scarcely remember, was likely a sister or cousin of my father, another Cleopatra by name. Some said she died shortly after my birth. Others whispered she lived on in exile. In truth, I grew up without the gentle guidance of a mother, apart from my nurse. I suspect Berenice and I both felt that absence keenly. In its void, we sisters perhaps craved power to fill the gap. So I learned early that the palace, for all its beauty, could also be a hive of intrigue. I would catch fragments of arguments behind closed doors, raised voices of advisors and courtiers. My father's face grew more lined each year, worry etching into his brow. Alexandria itself was restless. In the marketplace, beyond the palace gates, I saw graffiti scrawled on walls mocking Auletes, my father, for his love of music and his Roman friends. Once, while riding in a gilded carriage through the city with my tutor, I heard an Alexandrian bread seller mutter, "We starve while the king plays flutes for Romans." I wasn't supposed to hear such things, but I never could turn off my curiosity. The words stung, because I loved both my father and my people. How could I reconcile the two if they came into conflict? The helplessness I felt then hardened into resolve. I would rule differently. I would earn my people's love, not just command their obedience. One year, when I was around 11, dire news swept through the palace like a desert wind. My great-uncle, the king of Cyprus, my father's own brother, had taken his life. Rome had demanded Cyprus, accusing my great-uncle of aiding pirates, trumped-up charges, no doubt, and he chose death over exile. I remember father's reaction, a stunned, sorrowful silence. He locked himself away for hours. When he emerged, he was not the same. He moved stiffly, as if burdened by an invisible weight. That night, I crept into his chambers and found him gazing out a moonlit window toward the sea, tears glistening in his eyes. He did not notice me at first. "Father," I whispered, "are you unwell?" He turned, forcing a smile, and opened his arms. I rushed into them. He smelled of wine and myrrh. His chest trembled ever so slightly. "Little one," he said softly, stroking my hair, "all will be well. The gods test us, but we endure." I wanted desperately to believe him. I knew better than to ask about Cyprus. Even at that age, I was aware that politics claimed lives as easily as any war. My father's silence in the face of Rome's seizure of Cyprus had been noted by our people, and not kindly. Whispers of discontent grew louder in Alexandria's streets. They said our king was a coward, a Roman puppet, more concerned with his flute and finery than with Egypt's honor. How wrong they were about him, I thought angrily. Could they not see the danger Rome posed? My father had 4 younger children, myself, Berenice, Arsinoe, and little Ptolemy to protect and a kingdom to preserve. If placating Rome kept us safe, was that not wisdom rather than cowardice? But hungry bellies and wounded pride make for rebellious hearts. Within weeks, tension burst into open revolt. I woke one dawn to the sound of frantic footsteps and shouting outside my chamber. The air was thick with the salt tang of sea breeze, and something new. Smoke? Panic tasted like copper in my mouth. My nurse Neferura burst in, face ashen. "Princess, you must dress quickly," she quavered, thrusting a simple cloak at me instead of my usual embroidered robes. "What's happening?" I cried, my heart pounding as I shrugged on the cloak over my nightdress. Neferura's hands shook as she braided my hair hastily. "The city rises against the king. We must hurry. Your father wants you by his side." She whisked me through corridors that I had only ever strolled calmly. Now they were chaotic, with terrified servants and royal guards rushing to and fro. The scent of smoke grew stronger as we neared the courtyard. I heard a distant roar. An angry crowd? My small world was tilting on its axis. We found my father in the great hall, surrounded by a knot of loyal guards. His face lit up with relief as I ran to him. He was clad not in ceremonial gold, but in plain traveling garb, a sword at his belt. I had never seen him armed. "Cleopatra," he breathed, kneeling to my height and gripping my shoulders. His eyes, usually so soft when he looked at me, were now sharp with resolve. "We must leave Alexandria for a time." "Leave!" My voice came out as a squeak. Outside the hall, I could now discern the crowd's chants. "Bread! Justice! Down with the flute player!" The words made me shiver. "Yes, leave," Father said, attempting a reassuring smile that wavered. Behind him I saw a few of my sister Berenice's ladies in waiting hovering, looking excited rather than afraid. Berenice herself was nowhere to be seen. Confusion and fear swirled in me. Before I could ask more, a harsh crash echoed. Perhaps a gate being breached. Father stood, scooping me up in his arms, as he might have when I was smaller. "Hold tight to me, daughter," he commanded. I buried my face in the crook of his neck, smelling the familiar warmth of him, mixed with sweat and stress. My world shrank to the steady beat of his heart as he carried me, flanked by guards, out of a side passage toward the docks. I caught disjointed glimpses as we hurried along. The emerald flash of palm trees against a smoke-streaked sky, a cluster of palace servants sobbing and tearing at their robes, and farther off, near the main gate, a surging throng of citizens brandishing sticks and stones. We reached the royal harbor where the king's ship awaited, its sails already unfurled in preparation. Soldiers loyal to my father pushed us aboard. The gangplank was pulled in as soon as our feet hit the deck. Father set me down gently. Only then did I see, to my surprise, that we were accompanied by my younger brother, little Ptolemy, and our half-sister, Arsinoe, who clung to her nurse on the deck, wide-eyed and wailing. Berenice was not among us. Realization struck me hollow. Berenice had stayed behind. As the ship cast off, powerful oars stroking the waters, I stood at the stern, clutching the rail. The rising sun painted the sky in hues of red and orange, silhouetting the lighthouse of Pharos in the distance. Black smoke curled from some building near the palace, perhaps a torched outbuilding. Alexandria, my home, receded moment by moment. On the docks I could make out a crowd. Some shook fists at our departing vessel. Others knelt or bowed. They were still loyal. I felt hot tears on my cheeks. "Don't cry, Cleopatra," Father said, wrapping a comforting arm around me. His voice was gentle, but beneath it I heard an undertone of steel. "We shall return. I swear it on the gods. This is not the end of our rule, only a trial we must overcome." I swiped at my tears and lifted my chin, trying to be brave. At 11 years old, I made a silent vow as the city's shoreline blurred. I would see Alexandria again, and when I did, I would not be fleeing in fear, but triumphantly returning as its queen dot. In that dawn light, with the sea wind tousling my hair, I felt something hard inside me, a resolve, a purpose. Isis had marked me as her own, and I would not allow this exile to be the last note of my story. Egypt needed her princess. I would learn, I would grow strong, and one day the Nile would flow again for us. With my small hand gripping my father's, I watched the horizon and imagined the bright future beyond it, vowing not just with words, but with every fiber of my 11-year-old being, that I, Cleopatra, would restore the glory of the father and the motherland that I loved. Chapter 2. Exile and Return. Our voyage carried us northward, away from the only home I had ever known. In the weeks that followed our hurried flight from Alexandria, I found myself in lands I had only read about in scrolls. The salt of the Aegean Sea dried on my skin as our ship docked at the island of Rhodes, then sailed on to the bustling ports of the Italian peninsula. Everything was new and strange. I remember clinging to my father's hand as we disembarked at a seaside villa belonging to our Roman patron, Pompey the Great. The sky was a softer blue than in Egypt, almost muted, and the air carried the sharp, clean scent of cypress instead of the familiar sweet weight of palm and papyrus blossom. I was an exile, a princess without a palace, yet father assured me this was temporary. Pompey himself greeted us at his villa gates with grand Roman politeness. He was a formidable man, broad-shouldered, with stern features that softened when he addressed me. "Welcome, Princess Cleopatra," he said in halting Greek, pressing my small hand between his calloused ones. I had heard tales of Pompey Magnus, Rome's great general, who had won victories in far-flung provinces. To see him now as our host was awe-inspiring, yet I could tell from the tension in his jaw and the glances exchanged with my father that our presence was a delicate matter, a complication in Rome's complex web. For months we lived just outside Rome, on Pompey's estate in the Alban Hills. My father visited the city itself frequently, while I remained behind in the care of tutors and servants. I would watch him depart down the road toward Rome, accompanied by Pompey or one of his aides, carrying the heavy burdens of kingship on his back. Each time before he left, he would cup my chin and remind me, "Learn all you can, my bright star. Our dynasty's future depends on wisdom as much as power." Then off he would go, to plead our cause in the marble halls of the Republic. Though I could not attend those meetings, I caught glimpses of Roman life during our stay. Sometimes, under the watchful eye of a trusted servant, I ventured into the city incognito, draped in a plain stola like any Roman girl. The streets of Rome were a cacophony of sights and smells, stalls selling sizzling meats and garum sauce, beggars crying for alms, senators in their white togas edged with purple bustling importantly through the forum. The sheer scale, the organized energy of it, was impressive, yet lacked Alexandria's cosmopolitan flair. I marveled at the towering temples of Jupiter and Juno on the Capitoline Hill, at the centuries-old oaks in the Forum Romanum. But I also saw things that unsettled me. The dour faces of the poor, the swagger of Roman legionaries who seemed to own the streets, the way anyone not Roman was either ignored or treated with a hint of contempt. There was a hard pragmatism etched onto their faces, a sense of order that felt both powerful and vaguely threatening. Once, I overheard two plebeian women gossiping near a fountain. They spoke in Latin, not realizing I understood. "Have you heard?" one said. "King Ptolemy from Egypt is here, begging the Senate for help like a common petitioner." "Bah!" scoffed the other, adjusting her shawl. "If Rome helps him, it's only to line their own purses with Egypt's gold. Those Eastern kings are all as rich as Croesus and twice as fickle." I swallowed my indignation and hurried away, cheeks burning. So this is how they saw my father, my proud father, who had been treated as a god in our land, reduced to a suppliant in their eyes. It both pained and angered me. I began to understand the tightrope he had walked all these years with Rome. Their power was undeniable, but their arrogance chafed. Our benefactor Pompey did what he could to support us. He wined and dined influential senators, extolling the loyalty of Ptolemy XIII, ally and friend of Rome. I met Pompey's wife, a gracious lady named Cornelia, and their little son. They were kind to me, treating me to sweet Roman pastries of honey and ricotta, trying to cheer me from my homesickness. Sometimes Pompey would permit me to sit quietly in a corner during his discussions with father, provided I remained silent. I became quite adept at being unobtrusive, a skill that served me well in later years. It was in those shadowed corners that I first learned how the fates of empires turn on whispered bargains. I watched as father, face drawn but determined, spoke of the riches of Egypt and how vital our alliance was to Rome. I listened as Pompey and another powerful Roman, a man named Marcus Licinius Crassus, debated how and when to restore father to the throne. Crassus, wealthy and arrogant, seemed more interested in what profits could be made than in our family's plight. 10,000 talents, I heard him mention once, eyes gleaming at the prospect. The sum was astronomical, the price of the kingdom's restoration. Not all Romans were sympathetic. Some sneered that a king who had been driven out by his own people deserved no help. Others feared setting a precedent of direct Roman intervention in Egypt. There were heated arguments in the Senate, relayed to father by messengers. Each day in exile tested my father's resolve, and mine. Through it all, I kept up my studies as best I could, devouring any information on Roman laws and customs, trying to understand these people who held our fate in their hands. One chilly evening in the villa's courtyard, under a sky strange without our familiar Egyptian stars, I found my father brooding alone. A pair of oil lamps cast long shadows on the mosaic pavement. He was turning a signet ring between his fingers, a ring engraved with our dynasty's symbol, the eagle of Zeus. I approached quietly and sat beside him. After a moment, he spoke, voice barely above a whisper. I did what needed to be done, Cleo. I wasn't sure what he meant. I nestled closer, and he draped his heavy cloak around my shoulders to warm me. What did you do, father? He glanced around to ensure we were alone. Berenice's emissaries, the ones she sent to Rome to plead her case against me, they will not trouble us further. His tone was flat, but I understood instantly. Rumors had trickled back to the villa earlier. 2 Alexandrian envoys found dead in a dank alleyway near the Tiber. At the time, I scarcely dared connect the dots. Now, confronted with my father's admission, I felt my stomach twist. Those men had been my father's subjects, possibly even known to me by face. They had served my sister in her rebellion, and father had ordered them killed to remove their influence in Rome. I was quiet for a long time, the ring of that truth heavy between us. A cool breeze stirred the laurel trees. Will that help us return home? I asked at last. My voice small. Father exhaled, a plume of breath in the cool air. Pompey believes so. They spoke against me in the Senate. Now their tongues are silenced. His jaw tightened. Remember this, daughter. A ruler must sometimes make dreadful choices for the sake of her kingdom. Mercy and ruthlessness must both reside in a monarch's heart, each to be used at the proper time. I nodded, though a cold understanding settled on me, chilling me more than the night air. This was a lesson I wished I had not learned so young. Berenice was my sister, yet here we were plotting her downfall. There was no turning back. The divide in our family had cleaved too deep. That night, I gazed up at the unfamiliar constellations above Italy and prayed to every god who might be listening, to Isis, to Zeus, to any who cared for a displaced princess, that our exile would end swiftly and with minimal bloodshed. The gods, it seemed, finally answered. Pompey's efforts bore fruit in the form of a Roman intervention force. In the spring of 55 BCE, word came that Aulus Gabinius, the proconsul, governor of Syria, had agreed, Pompey's persuasive urging and a promise of immense payment, to march on Egypt and restore my father to his throne. Father was ecstatic. I remember Pompey embracing him in congratulations, while I danced around them, the weight on my heart lifting at last. We would be going home. Our journey back to Egypt was far different from our secretive flight out. This time, my father led an army. We traveled overland with Gabinius's legions and cavalry, a grand caravan of soldiers, horses, and supply wagons trudging through the harsh Sinai desert toward the Nile Valley. I rode in a covered carriage for much of the way, alongside Arsinoe and little Ptolemy, who were too young to understand the full import of events. Through the gauzy curtains, I could see the shimmer of heat on the sand dunes and the glint of Roman armor under the unforgiving sun. It was an arduous march, weeks of dust and scant water. Accustomed to the lush gardens of Alexandria, I found the desert both terrifying and awe-inspiring in its stark, brutal emptiness. Father, however, was invigorated by the sight of each milestone that brought us closer to Egypt. Occasionally, he rode up beside our carriage to check on us. His face, tanned and windblown, bore a more youthful look than I'd seen in years. Exile had aged him, but the hope of victory rejuvenated his spirit. We reached the frontiers of Egypt at Pelusium, the gateway fortress on the eastern Nile Delta. There, Berenice's forces, those loyal to my sister's usurpation, made their stand. Though I was kept behind lines for my safety, I could hear the thunder of battle beyond the city's walls. Gabinius's Roman legions clashed with the Egyptian army loyal to Berenice. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and the distant clang of steel. I prayed fervently for my father's success, for our soldiers' safety, and in a quiet corner of my heart, I prayed for Berenice too, that she would yield and live. By dusk, Pelusium fell. The city's gates were open to us. When I entered Pelusium under guard, the streets were eerily silent. Shattered shields and spears littered the ground, and a few homes smoldered, tendrils of smoke rising into the evening sky. Civilians peered fearfully from doorways as our contingent passed. I learned later of an incident that occurred in the aftermath. In his fury, my father wished to punish the city's populace for resisting him. Yet a Roman officer stepped forward and intervened, preventing a massacre of innocents. It was said this officer was Mark Antony, a dashing young cavalry commander under Gabinius. I did not witness the exchange, but whispers of it flew through the camp. Antony's name was on every tongue that night, spoken with admiration by the soldiers and with grudging respect even by my father. "The man has the bearing of Alexander," one of our Macedonian generals remarked, toasting Antony over the victory feast. I stored the name Mark Antony away in my mind, little knowing how crucial a role he would play in my life years hence. At that moment, I was simply grateful that someone had stayed my father's hand from vengeance. Perhaps Antony understood, as I did, that slaughtering subjects only deepens wounds. In any case, Pelusium's fall cleared our path to Alexandria. As we advanced toward the capital, Berenice's remaining forces melted away, or were swiftly defeated by the well-drilled Roman troops at our side. My heart pounded when at last I saw the familiar outline of Alexandria's white walls, and the Pharos lighthouse appearing on the horizon. The return felt surreal. Only 3 years had passed, yet I felt I had aged a lifetime. We re-entered the city not as furtive refugees, but at the head of an army. The Alexandrians had no choice but to submit. Many lined the streets to watch our procession, with expressions ranging from relief to sullen resentment. Father rode in a chariot, with all the regalia of a pharaoh restored. I sat beside him, dressed once again in the finery befitting a princess of the blood, clad in a flowing linen gown with gold threading and wearing a delicate crown circlet upon my braided hair. I maintained a calm, proud face, but inside I trembled with emotion. The chants of support from loyalists mixed with stony silence from others. Statues of Berenice had been toppled or hastily removed. Her reign, though brief, had left scars that would not heal overnight. We headed straight for the palace. There, in the great throne room, where once I had played at being queen, my sister Berenice IV was brought before my father in chains. She still wore the tattered remnants of a royal robe, and though her eyes flashed defiance, I could see fear behind them. My breath caught in my throat. This was not the proud sister who teased me in childhood. This was a defeated queen facing her judge. Around us, Gabinius's officers and Egyptian nobles formed a circle, tense and silent. Father descended from his throne and approached Berenice. For a moment, I hoped he might show mercy out of paternal love, or at least for the sake of our people's unity. Berenice was, after all, his daughter, my sister. But the memory of betrayal was too deep. Father's voice echoed coldly in the hall. "You dared take my throne and betray your own blood. The punishment is death." Berenice's composure cracked. She fell to her knees, pleading tearfully in a flurry of words, begging for life, blaming the advisors who guided her, even invoking sisterly bonds, and crying out, "Cleopatra, please, speak for me." Her eyes locked on mine, wide with desperation, and in them I saw a terrible reflection of my own face, trapped in the cruel demands of royalty. My stomach lurched. What could I do? I was barely 14, and the king's word was absolute. If I intervened, would it even matter? Would I be struck down as traitor too? Tears blurred my vision as I looked away. I did not speak. I could not. 2 Roman soldiers stepped forward at a nod from Gabinius. They led Berenice out of the hall swiftly. Her wails hung in the air long after she vanished from sight. I pressed a trembling hand to my lips, my eyes brimming. A heavy silence persisted until father, regaining his throne, signaled for the court to be dismissed. That night, Berenice was executed on my father's orders. They said she met her end with dignity, though no family was there to witness. I spent that night curled in my bed, sobbing quietly into a pillow so no one would hear. The palace that had once rung with our childhood laughter now felt haunted by ghosts of what might have been. I mourned the sister I had loved in simpler days and resolved, with a cold finality, to learn from her tragic folly. She had seized power and lost everything. I would not repeat her mistakes. If ever disloyalty brewed around me, I would see it coming, and I would outmaneuver it before swords were drawn. In the following days, my father set about the grim work of restoring order. The Roman troops remained in Alexandria as enforcers. There were debts to pay for our restoration, massive sums promised to Gabinius and his men. To satisfy these obligations, father entrusted our kingdom's treasury to a Roman financier named Rabirius Posthumus. Rabirius prowled through the royal accounts like a ravenous wolf, extracting heavy taxes from our weary population to repay the loans and bribes. Alexandria's citizens, who had first rejoiced at the end of chaos, soon found themselves groaning under new financial burdens. I heard the complaints whispered in the corridors and marketplaces, that in freeing Egypt from one yoke, we had placed another around its neck. It pained me deeply. I often cornered my father's advisors with suggestions. Could we not lessen the taxes, slow the repayment, do something to show mercy to the people? But the Roman debt had to be paid to secure our throne. These are the costs of kingship, princess. Our new chief minister, a sly eunuch named Pothinus, told me with a condescending pat on my shoulder. Worry not, such matters are beyond your concern. Beyond my concern. I smarted at his dismissal, but held my tongue, filing the slight away. Pothinus was a man to watch carefully. Despite the hardships, those years after our return were crucial for me. Father, perhaps feeling his mortality, began to entrust me with more responsibility. He officially named me his co-regent in 52 BCE. At 15, I suddenly found myself attending council meetings, co-signing decrees, and engaging with diplomats. The weight of the kingdom began to settle tangibly on my shoulders. Some older courtiers scoffed at a young woman sharing power, but father's word was law, and he would brook no disrespect toward me. I devoted myself to mastering statecraft. I read every document that crossed my desk and learned to detect the subtle interplay of interests behind each petition and law. Late at night, by lamplight, I pored over trade ledgers and agricultural reports, determined to understand the machinery of our kingdom. When the Nile flood failed one season and famine threatened, I took it upon myself to oversee relief measures. We opened royal granaries to feed the hungry and negotiated grain shipments from neighboring realms. I traveled by royal barge to inspect the canals and dikes, the lifelines of our irrigation, so that I might know not just the grandeur of Egypt, but its gritty realities. Wherever I went, I made a point to address local magistrates in their own tongue, befriending Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, and Syrians alike. Each time I did so, I saw pride kindle in their eyes. They felt seen and heard by their future queen. In those travels, I also learned of our subjects' reverence for the pharaoh's divine role. At the temples of Memphis and Thebes, priests greeted me as the daughter of Re and lady of Upper and Lower Egypt. I participated in ceremonies, standing beside my father, clad in the traditional robes of Isis, offering libations to Apis the sacred bull, and praying for the inundation of the Nile. I sensed in the murmured prayers of the crowds that they yearned for a ruler who truly cared for Egypt, not just the throne. I swore to myself I would be that ruler. But even as I grew in stature and skill, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Roman politics, ever tumultuous, took a turn that would soon ripple into our lives. In 53 BCE, Crassus, the Roman who had coveted our gold, met his end disastrously in Parthia. Pompey and another rising star of Rome, Julius Caesar, fell into rivalry. I paid keen attention to the reports from Rome, knowing our fate was tied to whichever Roman faction prevailed. Through all this, Father's health quietly worsened. The years of worry, excess, and age weighed on him. By early 51 BCE, he fell gravely ill. I spent many hours at his bedside, holding his hand as once he had held mine. How small and frail he looked beneath the fine linen sheets, this man who had loomed so large in my life. In lucid moments, he would speak softly to me, "Cleopatra, my time grows short. You must be strong, keep our lineage alive, keep Egypt sovereign. Trust in Rome's friendship, but never yield our honor." I wept and assured him I would make him proud. One late night, under the flicker of a lone lamp, he made me recite back to him the principles of governance he'd drilled into me. Protect the people's welfare, safeguard the throne at all costs, honor the gods, and remember that appearances can rule men's hearts as much as deeds. Squeezing my hand with surprising strength for one so weak, he added, "And trust no one fully, not even those of your blood, unless they have proven worthy. You have seen what even a sister can do. Learn from it." Shortly after, on a cool spring morning, Ptolemy XX, Pharaoh of Egypt, my beloved father, breathed his last. I was 18. In the moments after his soul departed, I felt an immense loneliness, a sudden terrifying silence in the palace. Yet I also felt his spirit, the essence of pharaonic duty, pass to me, as though the divine mantle settled more firmly, irrevocably, on my shoulders. I kissed his cold forehead and whispered, "I will not fail you, Father." There was little time for private grief. As the news spread, the palace buzzed with urgent activity. According to my father's will, I was to ascend the throne alongside my younger brother, Ptolemy XXIII. He was but 10 years old, still a child who played with toy soldiers and was easily led by the adults around him. Our tradition demanded we marry, as was custom for royal siblings, to present a united front. And so, even while I arranged my father's embalming and grand state funeral, I also prepared for a coronation and a wedding. The coronation ceremony took place in the Grand Temple at Memphis, the ancient capital, in reverence to pharaonic tradition. I traveled there in a gilded barge down the Nile, accompanied by my brother and an entourage of priests and nobles. The river bore us along under the benevolent gaze of Ra's sunlight, past green fields and villages where farmers paused in their toil to watch our procession. I felt a mix of sorrow and determination. Father should have been with us, yet in a way he was, living on in me. In the temple, amidst columns painted with lotus and papyrus motifs, I donned the double crown of Egypt for the first time. The red crown of Lower Egypt snug around the base of the towering white crown of Upper Egypt. Its weight was tangible and symbolic, a unification of peoples resting literally on my head. My brother, a child fidgeting under the weight of his smaller crown, stood at my side. The high priest of Ptah anointed us with sacred oils and proclaimed our royal titles. When it came my turn to speak, I lifted my chin and addressed the assembled priests and dignitaries in both Greek and Egyptian, so that all would understand. I am Cleopatra Thea Philippator, Cleopatra, the goddess who loves her father. I vow to uphold Ma'at, the order and justice of Egypt, and to protect our great land from all who would harm it. As Isis is my witness, I will be a mother to my people and a daughter of the Nile. Egypt shall rise in prosperity and glory in the days to come. A murmur of approval and surprise rippled through the hall at my use of the Egyptian tongue. I caught a few of the older priests wiping tears. Perhaps they were reminded of legends of old, of great queens like Hatshepsut, who had ruled long before our line. My heart swelled with the resolve and a touch of pride. We returned to Alexandria to sit upon the golden thrones as queen and king, pharaoh and co-regent. At the formal proclamation before the Alexandrian court, I sat slightly forward, my brother shyly half hidden by the arm of the throne. In that tableau, any keen observer could discern who would truly wield power. I was young, yes, but I was no passive ornament. Every decision, every decree in those early days bore my mark. I signed them in bold ink. Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. The road ahead was uncertain. Our coffers were strained. Rome's shadow persisted. And within the palace, I could sense the calculating eyes of courtiers like Pothinus and others, wondering how to manipulate a girl queen and a boy king to their advantage. But I was no naive child. Exile and return had tempered me. I knew already how bitter betrayal could taste and how sweet a hard-won victory felt. As I took my place as the Queen of the Nile, I silently promised Egypt and myself that I would not only meet the challenges to come, I would triumph over them, just as I had returned from exile to claim my destiny.